So good morning. Thank you so much for joining this session. My name is Juliana. I'm the events coordinator for Lloyds Bank Foundation. So I'm joined this morning by Gill Taylor, who is a highly experienced HR consultant with 30 years experience in the non-for-profit sector, and Katherine Sacks-Jones is the CEO from Become, a charity for children in care and young care leavers. Today's session is aimed at small voluntary organisations thinking of embedding home working for the future, which I think a lot of us have already been doing quite a lot over the last couple of months, and the benefits, the challenges, and how to make it succeed. So that's everything from me for now. So I'm actually going to pass over to Gill, who will take the next part of our session.
Great, thank you, Juliana. So, as Juliana said, I'm an HR consultant. I've been doing that for 33 years. I only work with the voluntary sector. And before that, I worked in the sector in small charities. So I'm a vol sector person through and through. We're going to start with a poll, I believe, Juliana, just to think about, so you can show me, or show the rest of us, show all of us, the number of people, the percentage of your staff who were home working before March. So before this whole COVID thing started, what kind of percentage of people did you have home working? And Juliana's bringing it up, I hope.
We are having some slight technical difficulties with the poll. Just give me 1 second, apologies.
Okay. Well, you should have received, let's talk about the materials then. So you should have received this morning a home working briefing, which I've written as a background to this webinar. It is quite a thorough bit of kit, that, and it's 43 pages. I know, I got carried away researching all of this. So the first part is the technical stuff, the legal and risk management, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute. And then part 2 is good practice. So lots of stuff about the softer side of home working, managing remotely, or looking after people's well-being, etc. And a few tips on communication, how to ensure good communication protocols. And then the third part is a record of case studies. So 3 case studies with 3 organisations I interviewed on their experiences of the challenges of home working in the immediate COVID phase, and then what they've learnt and how they're coping now. So if Juliana, if you can't get the polls up, shall we just start? So what I was going to ask you was kind of the percentage of people in your staff group you had working, home working before COVID, before March, and the percentage that has risen to now. And we can see some national statistics here. So if you look at the blue, that's us, that's the voluntary sector. I don't know if your faces are obscuring the key on the side. So blue is the voluntary sector, red is the public sector, and green is the private sector. So we can see regular home working before COVID, we had about 20%, just over 20%, now over 50%. So by regular home working, they mean 1 or 2 days a week. And permanent home working was at about 15%. And what people are expecting after, or certainly started to happen after lockdown, before we got lockdown 2, was 25% of staff home working. That's in the voluntary sector. We've clearly embraced it a lot more than some of the other sectors. And requests to work flexibly post home working. So the red column is more likely, the blue column is less likely. This comes from a report done by the CIPD, the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development, that was reported on in September. So it covers the period up to September. So we can see that on the red side, we've got an increase in compressed hours, an increase in flexi time requests, and a massive increase. It goes up to 33% of all requests to work flexibly are going to be home working. So if you've seen a rise, you're not the only ones. And one of the things has happened, one of the things I talk about in the report is that we have really flown into home working in a big way since March. It's been a crisis response, and we've done rather well at it, I think. but it's been about dealing with the urgency of coping with that change, and then evolving our day-to-day practice as we've gone along, as we've learned how to do it. It's not just about coping with the technology now, it's about learning how to manage. But one of the things I really think is important, and I know from my practice as an HR consultant, is that the paperwork at the end of the day is really important. So now perhaps is a good time to breathe, take a breath, and think, what do I need to do to get my paperwork in order? Because it does matter in the end, and especially if we get into disputes with people. While things are going well and everybody's coping and everybody's, you know, willing to give here and there, it's all right. But when things get stickier, we want it written down. Now, I have written a homeworking policy template and a homeworking agreement template, which you can get from me after today by emailing me. And my email is at the bottom of the homeworking report. It's jill@gilltaylor.org.uk, but that'll be in your paperwork you get. Then I'm going to look at the other big risk area, which is health and safety. We need to pay a lot of attention to health and safety and make sure we're covering off all areas on that. And then some miscellaneous risk management. So home suitable, complying with policies, data protection, data security, and a few other things. That's a kind of smaller end, small but important bits. So what is the key paperwork then? Well, for my money, it fits into three main parts. There's a nice CND symbol in the middle there. That was completely accidental, but there we go. We've got the homeworking policy. We've got the homeworking agreement and the contract of employment. Now, those of you, I can see there's a few of my clients, existing clients on the call, and you might be thinking, well, Jill, you've never mentioned this homeworking agreement to us before. And that's because I've changed my mind, really. I used to say, let's just have a policy and contract clauses. But now I think getting a homeworking agreement as well is an important bit of kit. So let me explain to you why that is. I think we start from the policy. We always start from the policy. That's about the principles you want to enshrine in your kind of statement about homeworking, why you believe it's important, why you want people to do it, how you're going to manage it, and some of the checks and balances and practical things. A policy should be not contractual. No policies should be contractual, in my view, and that's what lawyers recommend as well. So then we go on to the contract. The contract then ties in with your policies. It doesn't tie in, that's the whole point. It's separate from your policies, but it's parallel to. You have contract on one side, policies on the other side. And that is contractual. And what I would say about that is get a template contract and a particular template that you adapt for permanent home workers, so that you have that ready in your files and you can just bring it out when you get a new permanent home worker. The agreement then is the third prong of our, can you have a prong of a tapestry? I don't know. I think of it as a tapestry. Third part of the tapestry there. And in the homeworking agreement, it's not strictly contractual, but it's things that you want to be binding with that individual. So in the homeworking agreement, you can write down anything that's particular to that individual, and you create it at the time they start the homeworking. So in the home policy, and remember, I've got one of these that you can have after. What we want to do is the principles you want to enshrine, and then the types of homeworking, because although we're all engaging in effectively permanent homeworking at the moment, especially under lockdown again, there are other types. So occasional homeworking, which is where you stay in for the plumber. Regular homeworking, which could be a temporary or a permanent change, say 1 or 2 days a week, still where the office is the main place of work though. And then remote working for your staff who are maybe out and about, traveling a lot. Again, office is the main place of work, but they're remote most of the time. What do we need to get in there then? How to apply, contractual issues, employers' access to the home. And I know people are going to be thinking, why do we need that, Jill? That seems like a bit heavy-handed. Well, I like to trust people. I like to trust staff a lot. And I always start from a position of trust, but 95 to 99% of the time, that's fine and dandy. just sometimes we might occasionally want to exercise the right to access the home. So is it suitable? We might want to discuss home working with the person at their home. These are in the times when, of course, it's safe to visit people's homes. I'm not particularly talking about now, this minute, but you know, there will be a time when we are post-COVID. Definitely, there will be. I have to believe that. Or we've all been vaccinated, and it will be safe to go into people's homes again. We might want to discuss home working. We might want to send people to install things or repair things or recover things. And we might actually carry out risk assessments in someone's home. Then there's health and safety, risk assessments and other provisions, equipment, access to internet and broadband, who pays for it, and especially if it's theirs is not good enough. If someone's broadband is not good enough, who's going to pay for the upgrade? Things about insurance, expenses, home working allowance if you're paying one. If you are paying one, there's rules under HMRC about tax. £26 a month or £6 a week is tax free. Data equipment and data security, and ending or changing the agreement. So you can see all of that in my template. Then has the overarching contractual issues. And one of the things about a contract is both sides are in breach if we break it. So we're in breach of contract, or they're in breach, the employees are in breach of contract if we don't do what we say we're going to do in the contract. And then the home working agreement, as I've said, has details that are important, but you don't want to put in the contract template, because you don't want to be fiddling around with your contract template every time you make a new agreement with an individual. In the contract, the three key clauses that we want to update, upgrade, or specify for home working would be probationary period. You might want people to attend the office some of the time during the probationary period to meet people or get to know how the office works if you've still got a main office. Probationary period still applies during home working, even if you're both remote. And perhaps we might want to add that handling home working itself, being able to homework, being able to cope with home working, should be one of the criteria we assess as part of that probationary period. Hours of work, how flexible are we going to be? Are we going to have different core hours, extend core hours, make, I don't know what you want to do, but whatever you want to put in your template about hours of work, get it in there. Place of work, a lot of people think that when people work from home, that and the home is the place of work, that then they can then claim travel expenses to go to the office. Well, HMRC says, generally speaking, that is not correct. HMRC guidance says that we should, because generally speaking, and they're not thinking about COVID either, generally speaking, to work from home is a choice, and therefore you can't claim expenses to go to the office. Now, clearly there are exceptions to this where working from home is not necessarily a choice. And I can think of one example. So, for example, where you have a national organisation with regional workers. And if you were richer, you might have a Manchester office. Let's say you're a London-based organisation. You want to work in Manchester, you might have a Manchester office, but you can't afford it. So you have a worker there based at home, and that is effectively your Manchester office. There may be exceptions like that where they can claim travel expenses to head office. But I would, anyone who needs to interrogate this a bit more, I would say get yourself a copy, or which is what I did. I Googled and I looked online, HMRC Guidance Manual 490, section 3.36 onwards is what you want to read. And that has lots of examples of different types of home working and where you might be able to claim expenses and where you might not. Generally speaking, though, not. So the home working agreement, some specifics. This is where you might want to, it's got other stuff in it, but attendance at the office, working hours for them, what have you agreed with that individual? Anything you're going to agree with the individual goes in here. And then you both sign it. So that's really the paperwork side of it. I'm now going to look at there must be a slide missing where I haven't gone over the other risks, but you'll see in the notes anyway, or people can ask me about them. I think the main other bit of risk would be about data security. I live with a data protection expert, and he is constantly having conversations about data breaches that I earwig. And so all of those good data protection protocols and principles still apply to home working, obviously. And if people are using their own equipment, who's going to be doing backups? That's another thing. If they, hopefully they're all connected to your intranet in the cloud, or I don't really know how to talk about it, but hopefully it's all backed up somewhere. So the other key kind of technical area or risk management area is our health and safety duties. Now, I know a lot of you have been focusing on workstation risk assessments and provision of equipment, and that's good. That's what we should be doing. But there's also the well-being side, and providing training and support is actually a duty we have under Health and Safety at Work Act. Managing stress is a really important side of this as well. It's not just about well-being, it's actively managing people's stress. So we know the Health and Safety Executive has figures that show that before COVID, 54% of working days were lost to ill health through stress. 44% of that was down to workload, 8% change at work, 13% bullying or harassment, and lack of support, 14%. Now, these are national figures, not particularly voluntary sector figures. So hopefully we do better on the lack of support and bullying, but workload, that's why I've written managing overwork is an important part of our health and safety duties under working from home, and particularly under these times. And we also know that we've got COVID-related stress. We've got the additional pressures of anxiety about our own health, our loved ones' health, isolation. If you're not used to working from home or you haven't volunteered to work from home, it can be really challenging. And uncertainty about the economic situation, and perhaps uncertainty about our own future as voluntary sector organisations. That's all on the rise, getting to staff at the moment. There are some figures, occupational health report, this is nationwide, showed that of those homeworking, 55% of those reported back pain, increase in back pain. 48% reported working irregular hours, and 26% worked when ill. So these are red flags. You may already have noticed some of these coming up in your management, and if you have, then you're not alone. These are some figures from a report the CIPD did, the same one I've referenced already. So percentage of employees reporting concerns during COVID. Here's our voluntary sector column. So 43% of those working from home reported poor work-life balance. Over a third, fear and anxiety about self or loved one, negative impact of isolation, increased stress due to new demands of home working. Now that is a lot of your staff. If that's replicated in your organisation, and you've been spending a lot of time dealing with these issues, I'm not surprised, because it's borne out nationwide. If we look at the size of organisation, we can see smaller organisations have fewer concerns, but still 30% on the isolation. And the other one is musculoskeletal injuries from home working. 5% of staff, that's still 1 in 20. If you have 20 employees, you might expect one person to develop some they can be quite serious problems. I've had RSI and it lasted for years, and I was working on a lot on my computer, and at the end of one day, it just happened overnight, I could hardly pick up a paper plate at that, without having red hot pains down my arm. So, you know, RSI is a serious injury if it happens, and prevention is much better than cure. So what are the risks to us then? Now, these are the underpinning bits of law that we need to be bothered about. The claim of negligence is possible but rare, and the person has to show permanent injury to health because of our workplace stress. It's very rare cases, almost never heard of in the voluntary sector. Breach of contract, we have an implied duty of health and safety as well as an implied duty of care in our contract. And then the Health and Safety at Work Act itself. So we have an obligation to provide and maintain systems of work and a working environment which are, as far as is reasonably practicable, safe and without risk to health. Now, of course, working environment at home may not be safe for some people. And in the case studies, two out of the three of my respondents reported that they had staff members who could not work from home, just could not, either because of mental health reasons or because of concerns about being at home for one reason or another. So they opened the office for them. One also looked into providing an office space near to their home that wasn't the head office. So if someone is talking to you about concerns like that, you must take them really seriously. So our duties extend to providing and maintenance of safe plant, which of course is industry based, but equipment for us. So providing, it's not safe to work on a laptop for any length of time. You must have a screen, you must have a keyboard and mouse, a proper chair, proper desk. So as one respondee said to me, not balancing the laptop on the ironing board then, Jill. I said, no, not a good idea, balancing the laptop on the ironing board in the bedroom, because they live in a shared house and there's nowhere else to work. So safe systems of work, information and training we have to provide as well. So information on risk assessments, information on how to keep yourself safe at your workstation, and supervision and adequate support. This also applies to stress-related ill health. So what does this mean for us then? What do we have to do? What's best practice? So best practice is risk assessment of home and workstation. And you can do that by sending out information, or you can, some people have provided access to online specialists who will look at videos or photos of the home and give advice. Provision of equipment, mostly computer equipment, some desks and chairs. And then the broader duty of care and well-being. Now we actually have a duty to be proactive. That means noticing what's going on. Now I know a lot of you have been Zooming and looking at people's body language on Zoom is really important, because that's the way you notice if something's going wrong. And don't ignore it. Golden rule, never ignore a warning sign, especially if there are known factors about this individual. If you know they already have had mental health difficulties, or there are things you know about their home circumstances that cause you concern, be proactive, notice if something's going on and note it down. Get it on the record that you've done something and that you have a plan, you're going to get a plan. Take time to talk. And a lot of my clients have been upping one-to-ones to weekly from monthly, for example. Make sure that you are focusing in on their particular concerns. It might be worth getting a template one-to-one protocol or list of things you're going to talk about that includes stress factors, so that you remember to talk about them. Setting realistic goals and timescales. So remember that a lot of the nationwide figures show that overwork is one of the biggest stressors. Now that can apply to us as well, partly because we put demands on ourselves, partly because our clients have extra needs at the moment. And I know a lot of you have changed the focus of what you do to some emergency provisions. So that's on top of the rest of what we should be doing. So, but if you do know people are overworking, we actually have a duty to manage it. Remember, the working time regulations is an average of 48 hours a week, referenced over a 17-week period. And I'm hoping that most people aren't working anywhere near that. But one of my respondees decided to monitor her hours using Google Analytics and found that she was working more than that and worry for herself. So it can be easy to, because it's harder to to end work at 5 o'clock and then go home. We haven't got a transit time to going home. We've just got our home workspace. It can be easy to carry on. And that's not good for us over a long period of time. So the final slide then, the other risks. I have got my slide on the other risks. Okay, so is the home suitable and home visits? Just put that as a belt and braces bit in your policy. Data protection and data security. Remember your protocols, get new protocols for working at home if you need them, and remind staff how important it is, because data breaches can still occur, not only by, I don't know, sending things out on email, but also other people accessing home computers or other people looking over paperwork when they shouldn't. And important for clarity and expectations, these are minor risks, but just important to keep in your mind. Comply with other HR policies. Make sure you know who's insuring what at home. Is it you or is it them? Salary should remain the same. Benefits and working from home allowance. If you're going to make any different ones, put it down. And any changes to expenses. So all of this is in the notes. There is loads more in the notes about best practice in management generally, and the case study reports, which are really interesting reading and have lots of good tips. And if you would like me to send you the homeworking agreement and the homeworking policy, then just email me after today. So we've got a bit of time for questions, I think. I've not been looking at the chat as we've gone along, so I haven't noticed any come in. If anybody would like to, Juliana, if you'd like to tell me, anybody got any questions?
So we haven't at the moment, but I have just put in the chat. If anyone does have any questions, do feel free to add them in there. And what we'll do now while we're waiting for that is the first poll will launch that we were going to do at the beginning.
Okay.
Apologies for that. So hopefully you'll see a poll on your screen shortly. And if you do have any questions, do feel free to pop them in the chat box and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can.
So this was, what percentage of your staff were fully or partly working from home before COVID?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to do percentages in your head. Sorry. So 50% is half, obviously, 20% is a fifth. People got that? People done it? Okay, so less than 5 is the, oh, some had 20 to 50 though, 23% had 20 to 50. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of homeworking going on before COVID. Right, so that's 7, 23. Let me just write this down so I can, 10 and 47. Okay, and the next poll then, Juliana, please. So this is, now, it should be 2021, Juliana.
Oh.
So this is what I was hoping we would look at for when we think COVID is over, you know, so to capture how many people are really going to be looking at more home working. I'm assuming most of you are going to be looking at more home working, maybe not. So think 2021, think post lockdowns, some kind of different way of working in the future.
Jill, while people are just filling up that poll, we had a question come through about someone has asked, they said, thank you for a useful overview. I was wondering if you're seeing any new norms developing regarding travel expenses.
New norms? I don't know. I mean, I think HMRC is quite a what should we say, conservative institution. I think that they, I mean, I know people who have got into trouble with HMRC for paying travel expenses from home to work, home to the head office, when it's been a home worker and I've had to pay back tax. So your accountant should be helpful in all of this. But at the moment, I've certainly not seen any different. There's been no chat in my paper, in my kind of journals, people management journals about this. But you need to keep an eye out for it.
Thank you. We've had another question.
Oh, so you are changing. Okay, look at that. That's a lot more than I thought it would be. 52. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you're matching the national trends, people. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Oh, there we are.
We've got a couple more questions. Just
Okay.
before we go into break, somebody's asking, should we be paying a home working allowance if HMRC also has the tax relief available to individuals, or should we be encouraging them to claim?
Okay. Well, the home working allowance is the £26 a week. If you pay more than that, then it's taxable. You know, again, HMRC has quite clear rules about what's taxable and what's not taxable. If you look on their pages, if you look on in fact, I think the government, it's either the government website or the HMRC website has quite a lot about what is claimable and what isn't claimable.
And that, I'm assuming, is for everybody in the organisation. Is there guidance to help to work out what level these are paid, or it's just a blanket?
Yeah, so I think that what happens is that you add it onto their salary and it's not taxable, mostly, I think. I mean, some finance workers are about to correct me, no doubt. Or people can claim it themselves, but I think that would be unusual for people to claim it themselves.
And the when you talk about the allowance, that's the HMRC allowance, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, people do give more. I mean, I know that people can get up to what's 26 times, I need to do some sums, 26 times 12. That's, my calculator isn't turned on. £312 a year. So I know people do give more than that, but just be aware that anything over £312 a year is taxable. So therefore it's not, you know, anyway.
Just a few more questions. We've got some time. Is it acceptable for people to have self-assessed their home working environment on a standard form?
Well, depends what you mean by a standard form. I like the Health and Safety Executive has a risk assessment. I would always use that. And I don't know, I think, yes, it is, because I like to trust people. But if you notice, or if people start reporting back pain, or if you notice people are looking stressed and tired on your Zoom meetings, then pay attention to that and think, is something going wrong? How is your workstation? You're not still balancing the laptop on the ironing board, are you? You know, we have license to be relatively intrusive as managers, remember. If we see something we're not happy about, ask about it. It's the golden rule.
Great. Somebody's asked, should we give any specific notice period on ending temporary working from home? For example, when requiring people to return to the office for business purposes or post-lockdown?
1 month would be a good idea.
Okay.
That's what's recommended. That's what I put in my home working agreement anyway. I mean, you might take things into account, you know, if people are, I don't know, take people's circumstances into account, but a month is a good idea.
Yeah. And on top of that, can an employer specify that temporary working from home must be done from their own home? For example, not somebody else's home, if they're working on something that's quite sensitive, like domestic abuse work or things like that. Can an employer specify that temporary working has to be done from their own home?
Well, that's an interesting question. I suppose why would they be working from someone else's home would be what I want to know. And whose home is it? Is that other home a risk more than their own home? I mean, maybe their own home is a risk. I don't know. They'd have to interrogate that and think about why.
I guess it may be if someone's bubbling with somebody else or they're temporarily living with somebody else during this period, whether or not an employer can specify that actually, due to the nature of their work, they need to be in a certain environment.
Yeah, but I mean, if
that's what they were asking.
I'd want to know what they had in that home. You know, if they have a secure room they can lock at the end of the day, or you know, a better place to work in the other home, why not? I don't know, you'd have to think about it. You'd have to assess that risk. What would you be worried about in the other home? Would it be other people's access to this information? Well, if they're doing good data security and locking everything up, and that shouldn't matter. But how much do we? Well, there you go again. We're talking about trust, aren't we? How much do you trust that person to do the right thing? Ideally, we should trust our staff. And ideally, if they prove untrustworthy, we should do something about it in the probationary period or through disciplinary means as soon as we know that, not leave it lingering. But there's things for managers to explore with staff.
I think it's probably around things like phone calls or conversations that might be confidential. So just finding out if there's a policy on where their employers need to be in regards to the work that they're doing.
Yeah, not in the orbit of children or other people who can overhear it. Then if you're having a conversation about domestic abuse or sexual abuse, you cannot have it with other people in the room, especially not children.
Of course. I think we've got time for one or two more questions. Someone's asked, if someone starts working permanently from home, can the employer specify the amount that they are expected in the office for meetings or one-to-ones, etc.?
Yeah, you can. That's the kind of thing you put in your policy, you put in your home working agreement. Yeah. I mean, obviously, how do we know? We don't know necessarily. Things breathe in and out, don't they? So what we want is an expectation that you will be available to come to the office. And it might be as much as once a month or twice a month or whatever it is. And if that person has childcare responsibilities and they need to take the kids to and from school, then we need to talk about that. We need to talk about, well, what were you doing before? How did you manage it before? Because if you were coming to the office full time before and you could manage it, how, so we just need to talk these things through with staff.
Open line of communication sounds like a good thing. Brilliant. I think I've addressed all the questions that were in the chat. Severe apologies if I haven't done that, but I think I've gone through most of those, and the polls have been launched. So Jill, you've got your information there. Sorry for the technical difficulty.
Yeah.
So what we're a huge thank you to Jill for that. That was really thought-provoking, and there's a lot of information in there. Somebody asked if we can send the slides after the session. We can pop that into the resources email that gets sent out. And thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming back. I realised before we pop into the breakout rooms, I have pressed record again because we're going to have a lovely chat between Jill and Katherine, who is the CEO of Become, about primarily working from home. So I have popped the recording back on for that, and we'll put all that together for the webinar recording afterwards. So I'm going to hand back over to Jill and Katherine.
Cool. Right. So I'd like to introduce Katherine Sacks-Jones, who's CEO of Become, which was established in 1992. So it's the leading national charity for children and young people in care and young care leavers. And I was already working with Katherine before lockdown. Anyway, seems a long time ago, Katherine.
Very long time ago.
And we were already talking about home working, weren't we? So because I know Become is very keen on flexible working and home working anyway. And so it felt like you were a really good person to interview about your experience of how you found it, both a little bit in the crisis phase, but perhaps more about what you've learned already from the challenges and what you're thinking about for the future. So if we can just start with what kind of experience did you have of working from home before lockdown? How many people were working from home?
It was fairly limited. We're a small team of about 15 people, and we had a couple of home workers. We're a national charity, but our headquarters are London based, and a couple of people who weren't London based worked from home. But it was relatively limited. And obviously, like everyone, overnight, all of a sudden we went to everyone working from home in our case, which is how we've been working since March. And it was, and I'm sure a lot of people relate to this, it was a massive shift in how we did things. And it also made me reflect on kind of how we dealt with home working before then, which actually wasn't as thought through and considered as it could have been. but it's been a very interesting period, and I've learned a lot, and I'm definitely still learning about how you make it work. I mean, I guess, and I'm sure kind of everyone will relate to this, this isn't like normal home working. I think it's really worth emphasising this. This isn't a situation where people have chosen to work from home. This has kind of been forced onto us all, and the kind of, it's quite hard to separate this way of working from home from the broader stuff going on for people. So I think for us, well-being has been such a huge issue, and something that we've had to think about in a way that we didn't before. The kind of level of attention and discussion and consideration we give to the team's well-being has just changed dramatically since lockdown.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of, I mean, in a very practical sense, how do you do that? I mean, is it by looking at, is it through teams, or is it through individual managers, one-to-one contact with people?
So it's a mixture of things. I think it starts by recognizing that kind of everything's been thrown up in the air. There's a massive blurring for most people of the personal and the professional, which I think is one of the reasons why, as a leader, I feel a huge amount of responsibility for my team's well-being in a kind of much deeper way than I ever did previously. I think, and we definitely don't have this right. We're learning all the time. We're changing what we do all the time. It's on our senior management team's agenda pretty much every week. And we've adapted what we've done since the beginning of lockdown to now. It looks quite different. A really key part for me has been communication. You know, that's always important for leadership to communicate well to the organisation, but all the more so at the moment. I think being really thoughtful about kind of how that communication works, and also thinking about it as a two-way thing. So some of the kind of challenges as well as well-being I've found in lockdown have been that connectivity between people, and also between me and the rest of the organisation. So, you know, Jill, you talked about like being able to kind of tell people's body language or whatever, looking out for those signs on Zoom. It's really, really hard to do. And all the kind of organic stuff that you would have picked up in an office, you know, the casual chat over a cup of tea, getting a sense of the mood, all of those things that give you indicators to how people are doing, you don't have in the same way. So for me, communication's been key, but that's very much been a two-way thing. So thinking about how we communicate with the team, the different ways that we do that, how regularly and so on, which has changed a lot. But also, how do we find out what's going on for people? And recognizing that people like to kind of feedback in different ways. I've always been quite open, so people have popped over and talked to me about things. I've made sure I kind of making teas and coffees for people, use those informal ways to find out how people are doing, and all of those were suddenly removed overnight. So you had to be a lot more deliberate in how you went about getting feedback. So some of the things that we've done, if we've massively increased the number of team meetings that we have, and the format of those has changed over the time. At the moment, we have 3 team meetings a week. We have a kind of check-in on Monday morning on how people are doing. And I think that checking in just with how people are doing is really important, as well as the kind of more business side of things. On Wednesday, we have a longer team meeting where we often have agendaed items, although not always. And then Friday, we have more of a social check-in, which has kind of waned in popularity. People are using Teams a lot more to kind of communicate. There's lots of different chats for different things. And that's changed over the course of lockdown. So at the beginning, there was loads of stuff. There was a kind of, I don't know, I think the first phase of lockdown, there was quite a lot of energy or adrenaline. So people were really keen to kind of connect with people. This was a new way of working. We had things like, you know, someone started running a quiz every day, a daily quick quiz, organising socials, all of those things. And I'd be interested to hear other experiences, but for us, that's fallen away now. Kind of people have stopped doing those kind of things. And so there's a question over the leadership of the organisation, kind of how much can you step in there? Do people still want some of these things? How do you engineer some of those things that might have happened organically to start with? So there's those kind of structures for how we're meeting and discussing. I've also set up one-to-one meetings. Well, we're only a team of 15 people, so I can do this, and it looked different for different organizations, but I have a meeting with every single member of staff every 2 months, and that has been for me completely invaluable, because I've got feedback that I just wouldn't have got otherwise. So just things I had no idea were going on, or people were feeling unhappy about things, or I'm picking up through those one-to-one meetings. And the way I do them is they're very informal. They are kind of me checking in with people, how they're doing, what's going on for them, like what their home working setup's like, chatting kind of about anything they want. And then I will ask a few questions around how home working is going for them, what their workload is like, how kind of they're feeling in their team, and I've kind of been getting feedback through that I wouldn't otherwise have had at all. We've also done things like had quite a few team discussions about things, so talking about culture and home working and getting feedback in that way, but recognize not everyone feels comfortable feeding back in a kind of group setting, so looking at other mechanisms, including we've done surveys of the team to find out how they feel about home working, what we could be doing differently, what more we could be doing around wellbeing. And we've set up kind of anonymous portals that people can feed back on various issues as well. So there's a range of ways that we can find out what's happening with our team, and also that we can communicate to our team. And the other thing I like, kind of a lot of people are getting Zoom fatigue, so we do try and mix things up a bit. So on my regular one-to-ones with everyone, I will give people the option of doing a Zoom meeting or doing a phone call. Sometimes I'll go for a walk with people. We'll both go on walks around our local area and just have a phone call, and that kind of, I think, makes people feel a bit more relaxed and a bit more ready to open up about what's going on for them. But I have to say, I started doing it thinking just like, how will it go? Just having those one-to-ones, will it be worth it? I'm so busy, do I have time for this? And it's been completely invaluable for me.
That's really, really interesting to hear that. I think that one of the things I've noticed is that, one of the things I've read that really struck a chord with me is the idea of distance. We're not just distant from each other in miles. We're distant from each other in terms of as you said, connectivity, but in availability. How can I get hold of someone? How can someone be close to me? How can I be close to my staff? By reliability, by being available to them without burning myself out.
Yeah, I think there's lots of interesting things in there. We have made a lot more use of tech, things like Teams, kind of I've tried to foster a culture where people feel it's okay to just drop me a message or call me, in the same way they kind of pop by my desk in the office, and I do that to people as well, and we have a lot, and actually there's some real positives to the kind of, you can have quite a rich conversation and pick things up in the moment by using different team chats, which has been useful. I think there is a kind of positive to the connectivity, which is, in some senses, yes, we're kind of physically further apart, but in some senses, I'm getting to know people in a much more personal, closer way than I ever did before. You're literally in someone's home with these meetings. You find out a lot more about kind of what's going on for them, and what their home setup is. And people have varying degrees of comfort with that, actually, which can be challenging. But I think in some senses, because of everything we've been through as a team, because we are finding out more about each other's lives, we're closer than we have been.
I mean, I guess you're size 15 staff. You're about at the biggest that could possibly work for. Otherwise you'd have to get your senior managers to do much more of that, and you would kind of hear the feeding back in of that. I think that's been in a sense, it feels like a privilege, doesn't it?
Definitely. I think with the kind of individual meetings, though, you might not be able to do them one-to-one if you're much bigger than that, although you could potentially do them less frequently one-to-one, but you could probably do smaller groupings of people. So you might, have a cup of tea with 2 or 3 people, which will give them the opportunity to kind of feed back to you in a different way. And I think you can still be accessible on Teams and show that or whatever you're using, and show that people can kind of still call you and still drop in the way that they might have done previously in an office.
That's good. So what do you think, where can you see Become heading in the future in relation to home working, ma'am?
When we asked the team what they wanted to do in the future, everyone said that they value flexible working and they want to retain some flexibility in working. So we surveyed them, and pretty much everyone said that they want some balance of 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, or vice versa. And I think actually when we go into that kind of more hybrid way of working, it will present different challenges, like how do you make that work? What does your office space look like? How do you balance when people are at home and in the office, and making those connections? How do you keep the sense of one organization? You know, people miss, I'm sure everyone will accept, people miss being with colleagues, and people have varying degrees of comfort in their home office setup. One of the things that we found is our frontline staff have found working from home particularly difficult, because they are taking calls and dealing with young people who've experienced high levels of trauma, and there's something about dealing with that in your own environment and not being able to step away from it, which is really, really challenging. Whereas other people in kind of other functions have kind of really seen the benefits of it. But even those frontline staff have said, actually, you know, there are advantages to some home working, although we want the option of a different space as well. So I think in the future we want to be able to offer people that flexibility. I mean, it feels to me that that's kind of the way that things are going, and I think it will be very interesting to see how different employers respond differently. You know, you've got some of the very big organizations already saying, like Twitter and so on, that people will be able to work from home permanently if they want. And I think in kind of the years ahead, it'd be interesting if some stick to what perhaps might be seen as quite a traditional outlook of needing to be office based, how those cultures kind of differ and how attractive that is to staff.
Yeah, I mean, one of my interviewees in the case studies is effectively an investment bank working for the Methodist Church. They're the investment bank arm of the Methodist Church, which may seem a very strange client to have, but there you go, it's one of my clients. And, you know, they've never embraced home working. They've been very old fashioned in, you know, we have to be together, we have to have the special technology. They've all gone home, they've all worked from home. You know, that's been a massive learning for them, that you can do that kind of work remotely. And they will be encouraging that more in the future, because it does have advantages for us, as we know, maybe not all the time. I think one of the things someone else reported to me is the creative work has suffered. You know, sometimes for creativity, we need people to be there in the room, bouncing off each other in that way that it's so hard to replicate on remote communication. And some people have been, when they were allowed to, were getting together with socially distanced meetings in hotels and so on, just for that purpose, whether it's at a senior management level or a team and creativity level. Anyway, we've reached that time, and I'm going to ask you to kind of round up your main learning points, would you say, and has this influenced your management style, the things that you're going to take forward into the future?
Yeah, I think one of the things for us, we've had a really committed staff, and actually we've probably seen productivity go up overall. You know, this period hasn't been without its challenges, but there's been a lot of commitment. So I guess kind of a few things that I've learned over the last few months. I mentioned around communication, and that's probably the number one takeaway for me, really thinking about your routes to two-way communication with the team, and continually adapting those as things change. I guess the other is change. You mentioned, Gill, about trust. I do think that you need high degrees of trust in your staff, and you need to focus on managing by outcomes rather than outputs. You can't look at how long people are sitting at their desk and so on. So you have to trust that people are going to be able to deliver. For me, the challenge probably has been more around not setting expectations too high, and kind of thinking through how you work that through. The danger for us and our staff team has been people working too hard rather than not hard enough, and kind of all the stuff you mentioned around blurring of boundaries and not stepping away at the end of the day. That's where our set of challenges has been. I recognise that will differ for different organisations. So being really clear around expectations and not setting them too high is something that I'm kind of continually challenging myself on. The other thing that's big is, like, how do you do celebration and recognition in this virtual world? I think that can be really difficult. There's so much going on. We're trying to move on to the next thing. Good things happen. You can't buy a cake. You can't all come together in the office. You can't do those things that you used to do. But it's super important that we're still recognizing what the team's done, and that we're taking moments to stop and do that. So we've come up with lots of different ways of doing that. And again, like, these are very much trial and error. Not all of them have worked, but we've done things like Friday shout outs, where people can anonymously we submit praise for a fellow team member and then we'll read them out on a Friday. We've done things which are slightly cringy, but I think people deep down quite liked, where we've done kind of circles of appreciation, focused on different team members, and everyone said what they appreciated about working with them. Something I haven't done, but I keep meaning to, is just sending out little cards, thank you cards, or acknowledging when people have worked hard, or even little gifts. And we're going to be thinking about, we've got an away day coming up that we're doing virtually, so we'll be sending little gifts out to people to just kind of acknowledge what they're doing. You know, it makes quite a difference at the moment getting something through the post. So I think small gestures can go quite a long way. And the other big thing, 2 more things, Jill, and then I'll wrap up. Social aspects of work. Like, that is quite a hard thing to lose, particularly for people for whom work is a huge part of their identity and they really enjoy that social aspect. Like, trying to recreate bits of that in a kind of virtual world is difficult, and a lot of the organic stuff has dropped off. So we're thinking a lot more about how we can do some fun team events. We did a virtual away day, a virtual escape room a couple of weeks ago, which was really fun, went down really well. Again, small stuff, but just bringing people together in a slightly different way and remembering we can still have fun together. And then I think finally, having a shared vision of the organisation and shared values is more important than ever, and taking the time to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page and understands what we're all trying to do together. So we are going to do a virtual away day, which I kind of put off for a while, and everyone's so busy, and will it work on Zoom? But actually the feedback that I'm getting about the idea is like, people really want to step outside of their kind of day-to-day work and reflect on kind of why we're all here together and spend a bit of time on purpose. So I do think kind of making sure that we keep that focus on purpose is really important in the charity sector particularly.
Yeah. Oh, that's really, really insightful. Thank you. That's a very excellent presentation. I just had one thought while you were talking about the trust aspect of it, which is about new starters. You know, we have had new starters during this time, and
it's really tough. Don't have answers to that, any clear answers. We've had a few people, I'm sure most people will have probably had 1 or 2 people starting new. Like everything, it just requires a bit more engineering, you know, all the kind of soft stuff, the going for lunch, the people making them tea, getting to know the organisation, you can't do in the same way. So we've, you know, with new starters, again, this is because of the size of our organisation, but we're making sure that they have one-to-ones with everyone else in the organisation individually, and also setting up some ongoing kind of catch-ups and looking at where we can do a bit more informal kind of meetings and encouraging them between different team members. I think a risk is you might get kind of increased siloed working and things if you're not careful, as people just see less of people in their other teams. And something else we did a couple of weeks ago, which was really nice, and I'm going to try again, was we used the like breakout function on Zoom at a team meeting, and we put everyone into pairs with people that they didn't normally work with, just to kind of catch up on. I think we set them some questions to come back on, but little things like that I do think can make quite a difference. So we're always kind of looking at new ideas and what more we can do around that.